So, it's over. The longest federal government shutdown in U.S. history has finally ended. But, across the country, the feeling isn't exactly a party. It's more like tepid relief. For weeks, this shutdown threw the lives of 1.4 million federal workers into total chaos and put a stop to some really vital public services. So, how did we even get here? And what does this fragile peace actually mean for all of us?
35 days. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how long this spiral of economic uncertainty went on, earning it a pretty dubious spot in the history books. It was a completely unprecedented period of deadlock that left so many Americans just wondering when or if it would ever end.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the sheer scale of this record-breaking shutdown. Then, we're going to get into the real-world human and economic costs, the stuff that actually affects people. After that, we'll unpack the political standoff that was at the heart of the whole crisis, take a look at the fragile truce that ended it, and finally, ask that big question: what comes next?
So first up, the sheer scale of it all. For 35 straight days, this shutdown created this pervasive sense of gloom and instability. And it wasn't just in Washington, D.C., it was impacting everything from federal agencies to the entire national economy. This wasn't just another political spat. It was a long, drawn-out crisis with some serious, far-reaching consequences.
And those consequences? They were felt most deeply by ordinary people. This is really where a big political headline becomes a tangible, everyday struggle for millions of Americans.
And that's the number that just blows my mind. Nearly 1.4 million federal employees had their lives completely thrown into chaos. These are people who were either furloughed, which basically means sent home from their jobs, or they were forced to keep working without any idea when their next paycheck was going to arrive.
And this slide really shows how the shutdown wasn't some abstract problem. We're talking about real-world disruptions. There were issues with flights, delays in food stamps for people who desperately need them, and a big slowdown at the IRS. National parks were a mess, early learning programs for families got hit, and social services were strained all over the country.
So what could possibly cause this massive level of disruption? Well, at its core, this was a high-stakes political battle. Let's really break down the central disagreement that led to this whole impasse. It all really boiled down to this. The White House was demanding more than $5 billion to fund a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. On the other side, congressional Democrats flatly refused to approve any new funding for it. And that created this fundamental deadlock over the federal budget, which is what triggered the shutdown. This kind of fight really highlights the power of procedure in Washington. In the Senate, there's this tool called the filibuster, which the minority party can use to block legislation by basically talking it to death. Now, while it wasn't the direct cause right here, it's a perfect example of the kind of high-stakes tools that both parties can use to bring everything to a grinding halt. So, after 35 really long days, the logjam finally broke. But the way it ended? Well, it wasn't some grand compromise. It was, at best, a really fragile truce that basically just pushed the bigger questions down the road. So what happened? Well, ultimately, the pressure from all the shutdown's widespread impacts just became too great to ignore. After 35 days, the president agreed to a temporary deal to reopen the government for 3 weeks. And the key part? That deal included zero new money for the border wall. It was widely seen as a major concession from the White House. And it's interesting, right? Ending these kinds of standoffs often comes down to just a small number of lawmakers who are willing to cross the aisle. For instance, in a previous shutdown, a deal was only reached because 8 senators broke ranks to end the deadlock. It's just a reminder that even in today's polarized world, it's those bipartisan votes that ultimately break an impasse. And this is the final step. A vote is taken, the bill passes, and the government reopens. But as you can tell, even when they reach a resolution, those deep divisions that caused the crisis in the first place, they're still there. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. The deal itself was just a temporary fix. It only funded the government for 3 weeks. That gave negotiators a tiny window to try and find a long-term solution. In reality, it just kicked the can down the road, setting the stage for another potential standoff just a few weeks later.
Which brings us to our final section. What comes next? Because if this whole event taught us anything, it's that ending one crisis doesn't mean you've prevented the next one. The political battle is far, far from over.
So, with the shutdown over, the focus immediately shifted to the long-term consequences. I mean, this kind of high-stakes fight has a lasting impact on politics, and it absolutely influences how people feel heading into major elections.
Events like these can almost become a referendum on an administration, and they have the power to dramatically shift the balance of power.
And that leaves us with this final crucial question. This shutdown really exposed some deep vulnerabilities in our political system. So as we move forward, will our leaders find a way to compromise, or is this cycle of high-stakes conflict just the new normal? Honestly, the answer to that is going to define American politics for years to come.